There's recording
Oh, you
pending.
did.
Oh, there we go. It is now recording. I will pass over to Nadia.
Okay, thanks everyone. I'm going to be talking through a whole bunch of different slides, and forgive me if it's going to be a little bit rushed. I've got probably way too much information in here. This is a presentation I gave to my husband's work, who are a bunch of physicists, and they feel like they've heard this word digital transformation bandied about at their work, which is Callaghan Innovation, but it doesn't seem to fit with what's happening there, and they just wanted to know what it was. So I was pushed into giving a presentation about it, which I did a couple of weeks ago, and then I thought, actually I should probably give the same presentation here. So yeah, forgive me if it's a little bit rushed, but I'll try and make sure that we've got time at the end for people to ask questions. Okay, so what I'm going to be talking about is these 4 topics here. So I'm going to talk a little bit at quite a high level about what digital transformation is, and then I'm going to talk about government as a platform as one particular strategy of digital transformation, and then as a strand of that I'm going to talk about rules as code, and then we've got a little bit of time, if we've got time at the end, just the example, which is the project I've been working on here at council. So the next slide. Okay, so first we're going to talk about digital transformation, which is just one of those terms that gets bandied about quite a lot. And like many of these things, we don't really know what it means necessarily in our context. And I came across this this interesting slide, this from a innovation designer from Bromford Lab in Innovation Lab in the UK, and I thought it quite well reflected. His perspectives quite well reflect the lessons I've learned over the last decade in this space. So it's actually about the process by which you change your business model or approach, and some of this might have digital elements to it. So that's kind of that transformation part. But if we think about that it's all about digital or technology, then there's that implication that all our problems are easily solvable by rushing towards technology as though it's the only solution. So our obsession with digital transformation sometimes is becoming part of the problem rather than the solution itself. I recognise that some of the things we're going to talk about in this presentation are going to be very familiar to some of you anyway, from a human-centred design point of view. So forgive me for that. So this fixation on the digital can imply that everything can be solved. But implying everything can be solved within a system does huge disservice to our people and the human capacity for creativity and innovation. And I've seen things like that happen when you go into a situation and you just let people actually talk and connect with each other. They can come up with some quite interesting non-digital ways to solve their problems. But by transforming something and changing an organisation and how it works, it has many different elements. And that includes leadership, people, process, and digital. And so this guy, Paul Taylor, suggests that strategy, not technology, is actually what drives transformation. However, in my experience in the New Zealand Public Service, we tend to have an over-reliance on developing strategies that are not well supported by good evidence or practical experience of what good looks like and how to get there. So, but we're good at writing these strategies, but very poor at implementing them. And even worse at measuring the effectiveness of our efforts, because we move on to the next big thing. So many of you might be familiar with the concept of the UK government digital services, which was set up many years ago now, and they were focused on this idea that the strategy should be delivery. And this was taken directly from the private sector technology companies, where agile methods and modern software development meant that new digital services could be delivered rapidly. So they wouldn't spend a whole year developing a strategic document and then another year building a business case and another 2 years developing a new digital service. Instead, they'd cut to the chase and put something in the hands of users sooner rather than later. But this was controversial when they started doing this, because it often assumed that digital services were the answer. But what it did do was start to demonstrate the art of the possible. And it did demonstrate that government IT projects could be delivered in a time and cost-effective manner. And the idea that you should put the end user in your service at the centre of your service design, rather than the needs of government or an organisation's business processes at the centre. So this is where we lead into, that whole area of human-centred design, where we're aiming to solve problems, for government service delivery and taking that human-centric approach. And so the aim is always to remember that humans are both the creators and consumers of any process, service or product. If we want to be successful, we should put the needs of the impacted people at the centre of our design. So this is a practice of ensuring that we have good evidence of desirability, feasibility and viability of anything we design. So do people want it? Is it technically and legally possible and ethically appropriate? And is it something that we have the capability, the budget to deliver and develop and continually improve? Often that continually improve part is left out when we're in the rush to produce something. So many of you would be familiar with the phases of design process, and the key first step of observation, understanding the problem space and ensuring you're focusing on the right problem from the relevant perspectives. And then that really fun bit, which is the ideation, which is usually what humans jump to before they understand the problem. We create lots of ideas, and then we might decide a few of those ideas to take forward. Then we do rapid prototyping and user feedback and iteration. And that's about ensuring we're solving the right problem in the right way. Then we do implementation, and then we actually need to go back round again to observation to measure to see if, we're achieving those intended outcomes. So unfortunately, even now, even those people who understand terms like human-centered design and co-design and things like that, we still can shortcut this process and assume that we inherently understand the problem, despite having not gathered sufficient evidence. And we've seen it many times in different organisations. It's even worse when somebody comes to the table with a particular solution and assumes that they understand the problem from other people's perspectives without actually speaking to them. But for effective and sustainable digital transformation to occur, first we have to do that hard work, which, given the number of people in this listening to this presentation who work in that customer research space, you understand. We have to understand those problems, the deep roots of those problems, and how they fit within the broader context of the systems that people work within. And we need to understand who is affected and how. What are the existing trade-offs? And also recognise that we can't eat the whole elephant at once. And so trying to work out where the most strategic place to start is. So then the other thing is that digital transformation is often confused with digitalisation, which is just taking that existing process and turning it into a digital one. But digital transformation can actually mean completely rethinking the service, and this can impact people's jobs. So that's something we always have to be wary of. So to do this empathetically means you need to balance the needs of the organisation and the needs of the end user. So while we like to say we're customer focused and customer first, we also have to understand that we have customers inside the organisation. So we need to proactively involve those people who are affected both inside and outside the organisation in the design and development of the service. So in summary, I really like this one, and this again was from Paul. Digital transformation requires organisations to recognise the need to change mindsets, skill sets and tool sets, change the way we govern by devolving influence to those closest to the problem and the potential solution, make evidence-based decisions, demonstrate and expect transparency of decision making, change slowly, experiment and learning by doing and gathering support through showing and not telling, demonstrate the opportunity through prototyping, reflecting, considering, being open and curious and acting deliberately. not getting sort of tied up in busy work that can happen around projects. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about this concept of government as a platform, which was sort of coined by Tim O'Reilly in 2011, and many governments have picked this up in their digital strategies, and they all have different understandings and different meanings. So Richard Pope, he was one of the founding members of the UK's Government Digital Service, and he recently offered a new working definition of government as a platform. Let's give you a moment to read that. So again, it's quite technically focused, and for those that don't know what an application programming interface is, or an API, I think it was Matt who suggested the waiter analogy, or at least there's one that's out there on the internet for those who don't know, but it's a way for computers to exchange data, and we can think of it as the waiter that delivers your food, the order from the kitchen, and then returns with your meal. It's a simplistic way of thinking about it. So this is a very technical definition of government as a platform, and I've adapted it somewhat into my kind of clunky little diagram here. I'll just give a description of kind of what this is saying. So we start from the bottom, and we talk about an evidence base, and so we need to build this platform of an evidence base that help us understand people's lived experience, and using that as part of robust research. So components of this could be service analytics, that help us to, in research and things like that. But we are looking to understand where the gaps are, and where to prioritise our efforts, and also to understand what the effects are of policy or service change. So that's that measurement side of it. And an all of government perspective, there's a concept there around all of government service analytics, because we know that, for example, when you're talking about services on websites, people have to jump between different types of websites and things, and we don't necessarily have a view about what happens. So, for example, if one agency decides to change their policy, and because they want less people coming to them for something, and then their analytics shows them that that is actually what's happening as a result, what they don't necessarily pick up is now those people are going to another agency and trying to work out how to get what they need from them. So it's that ability to be able to see across systems that's really valuable. Then the next layer of this platform is openness and transparency, and allowing for critical feedback and ensuring that people understand government processes and decision making, building for reuse, so by others, and reusing what others have created. For example, publicly sharing what we've learned, open sourcing what we build, opening up data, opening up information, transactional services, and the rules of government, so that we can build scalable and modular and integrated solutions. And that means we've got the ability to quickly respond to changing needs, because we can grab the components that we need. And it means that we can produce integrated services that respond to the needs of people rather than the structure of our organisation or our agencies. So by opening up this stuff, it also enables community, business and non-government organisations to deliver targeted services for their particular constituents. For example, making things available to Citizens Advice Bureau programmatically means that they can do better delivery face-to-face. They spend hundreds of volunteer hours a year putting together service catalogues, understanding where all the services are across government and outside of government, and they have to do that manually because no one's providing that information to them. So the next layer is about collaboration, so working together across agencies and across organisations, in multidisciplinary and multi-agency teams, coming together to understand and explore the best way to deliver to people's needs, because people don't necessarily operate in the silos of our organisations. And that's a focus on delivering to people as individuals, as whānau, as community, as businesses. So this also helps if you have people coming together across business units or across government agencies. It helps to build a systems view and also an empathy for people inside and outside of government, particularly if you bring together your which still very much resisted when we want to do co-design. It's actually bringing the users in, or our customers in, to co-design with us. Still a little bit of a holy cow. Is that a word? So then we've got, and this is one of the things I've spent a vast amount of my career in the public service, and something that we need to gain again is being service oriented. So we need to remember what it is to serve, and that we have people inside and outside of organisations that we're serving. And so it's time that we put people before process, which is, process is easy, people are difficult. So, you can understand why we went down that path. But we all inherently want to deliver something of value. So we take a service design approach to things, and how we deliver. Then we'll be ensuring that we're delivering value based on the understanding of the people and the systems that we're delivering to. And this means that we're optimising our services through continuous improvement based on that foundation of the evidence base. And the next layer is being responsive. So that's right at the top. And as I was saying before, many of these things, if we build this foundation, helps us to be responsive to the changing situations. Going into lockdowns, or needing to deliver services in a completely different way quickly. But in order to respond, we have to be actively listening, using every channel available to us, and then we need to validate what we hear. So this again brings us back down to that evidence base. And once we understand the need, we need to do our best to deliver to that need as swiftly as we can. And this helps to build public trust, and gives us license to invest further. So in summary, government as a platform is both, in my view, a technical architecture of government service delivery, but also it's a way for us to be able to scale to meet the needs of ever-changing needs of society. And it's the people in public services that can also provide that platform to build the trust in government and in democratic processes. So the next part of the presentation is actually just going to be looking at this part down here, which is about the open rules. So this is my little rules as an API diagram here, but also the open information side of it. So this is looking at rules as code, which is it's one of those terms that has taken up many different, it's been given different names. It's been called, in the few years that I've been involved in this, it's been called legislation as code, rules as code, and then we coined a new term, which I don't think is any good, but I came up with it, which is called better rules. So there's an example of what the outcome of this, before I explain what it is if we want to look at the delivery of rules, legislation, policy for New Zealand, usually what happens is they, lots of parts of services, government services, are delivered as a result of rules, legislation and policy. And in all of those regulations and legislation, they detail compliance. Sometimes they're detailing compliance, eligibility criteria, and what entitlements you get, and what the calculations are, because they can be sometimes quite prescriptive. And often people want to know really easily how to comply with rules. Most people aren't trying to get around the rules. They just want to know what the rules are and what their rights and obligations are, and also how government can support them I mean, a case in point is the wage subsidy, who could apply and then who was applying. So this website that was put together, we worked on when I was in the Service Innovation Lab in collaboration with Internal Affairs and a bunch of other people. This is a tool that helps you to anonymously work out whether you can get any financial support when you've got a new family. And behind this was sitting the legislation from the Social Security Act, which is a very, very large piece of legislation, and also Income Tax Act, and I think another few other pieces of legislation. And what we were trying to do was take that written legislation and turn it into something that was executable by a machine, and that's not just a computer can read it, because all of the legislation on legislation.gov.nz is readable but not understandable, and you can't use it to calculate whether you can get any financial support. So we went through this process of taking this legislation. Some of it, the legislation that we looked at, was written decades ago and is in difficult language. And then that's contrasted with, another section of the same piece of legislation that was only written recently and may still be difficult, but very different language. So basically legislation gets changed organically almost, but yeah, it gets changed over time. And so you've got old parts and new parts that all sit together and supposed to work nicely together. Anyway, it was a big task to do this and turn it into a service. But what we learned through that is we could find gaps in the legislation. We could find edge cases. We weren't experts in this field of law, and we had big questions as to what it all meant. So what we were doing was trying to do a reinterpretation of this legislation. And this is what happens every time some software developer starts to try and code a rule set. They have to now reinterpret it for the umpteenth time. And so if you think of all the payroll systems, all of the accounting systems, they're all consuming legislation or implementing legislation, but they're all interpreting it in their own special way. So the usual and traditional way that we produce policy and legislation is that we do it through this kind of very waterfall approach, which is where we develop it in silos. So you have policy people who will hopefully do some good research and then come up with some policy and some drafting instructions that then get handed over to the Parliamentary Council Office, and then they write the legislation. They're very trained in logical thinking and language, and they have standards of practice about how they draft legislation. Then it goes through parliamentary processes, select committees, it gets changed, sometimes a bit warped, and then it eventually gets enacted, and then it gets chucked over the fence to service delivery people, so service designers and software developers, and then they have to interpret it and try and understand the context, the policy intent, and they're also trying to implement it alongside other services at the same time. And what they find is that A, they can cause translation errors, and B, they implement it the best they can, and sometimes they end up not being able to deliver on the policy intent because it may be in conflict with other services and other rule sets. So legislation doesn't always get implemented the way it was intended, and or parts of it gets ignored. So case in point is MSD, I think, is going to have a very, very large court case against it, because for about 10 years they've been ignoring a part of the legislation around the rules around giving people a benefit when they have had redundancy payouts. And so there's kind of three layers of rules that happen in government. One is legislation and the regulatory layer. Two is at the policy or operational policy layer. And then three is operational practice. And they don't always line up. And they should. Theoretically, should be a really clear, traceable, logical line between these three things. But each layer down is kind of making up for the gaps in the one above. And so you have these issues where, you know, these rule sets aren't necessarily designed to be easily implemented, or implemented in an integrated way alongside other services. So we did a 3-week discovery with a bunch of different people from different agencies way back in 2018, and we came across this problem, and we said, how could we make it so that you could deliver machine consumable legislation that was designed well, so that it could be both human readable and understandable, and machine consumable, so we could deliver a single source of a machine readable version of that, or machine consumable version of that, but then every service would consume, so that you don't have translation errors. And if you go and change the tax rate, you know, the GST rate, then you do it in one place, and then every piece of accounting software just consumed that change. So we worked out a method where you do a co-design of the logic of the rule set. You develop a blueprint, basically of concept models, and trying to understand the underlying concepts of what it is you're trying to achieve. You do that with service designers, with policy people, legislative drafters, with consumers of that, potentially as well, or interested parties, unions, whatever. So that's a very human process. And from that, you develop a blueprint that can be used to draft the human version, and then also at the same time drafting the machine consumable version. Even in the process of drafting both the human and the machine consumable version at the same time, you can use that as an iterative process to better to improve the rule sets and their understandability. And then from that, you could be publishing this single source of rules as code, as well as a human understood version. And then if you're implementing this into software systems, you could be getting that service delivery and service analytics as feedback about how people are interacting with those rules. And you know, you could be using that as part of your improvement of the rule sets themselves. So part of this is actually seeing government rules as a service delivery in itself, in and of itself. So we wrote this 3-week discovery into I think I wrote it up into about a 40-page document. I published it. It got huge international attention, and the OECD picked it up as one of its case studies it put into its Global Trends report for 2019. So there's been a number of different governments who have picked up on this approach, and just this morning I was in a group of people who want to develop, in New Zealand government, who want to develop a community of practitioners, people in LINS, MSD, MB, and IRD, who are saying this is what we want to be doing, both the early stage development, conceptual modelling of rule sets, and then turning them into machine consumable ones. So it's still very much an emerging space, but there is a large connection. I'm in a number of different international groups, and now one in the planning space, who are really, really engaged and want to progress this. It's only innovative in the perspective of taking existing practices and bringing them together in a new way, which is usually what innovation is. There's not really anything that new under the sun. So it's more a case of bringing things together in different ways. So the example that I've got in the local government space may be familiar to some of you, but essentially it's around one-stop shop. Under that, we've got this trying to improve the process of resource consents. So this is sort of, there was a research discovery that was done, and it was understanding what it was that resource consents were as a system. So this is, sorry, I didn't preface this, that this example is of rules as code in the resource consent space. And so this is just a very short way to explain resource consent as you know, from a people, council and central government perspective. I'll just give you a moment to read that. So the research discovery talked to external customers and internal teams, and it was a way of understanding this as a system as a regulatory system, so the RMA and city planning and management, as an operational system, so the application processing of resource consents, and understanding the physical and digital touch points as well, and the data creation and management through this whole system. And a really important point of all of this, even though I'm talking a lot about technology, is don't forget the human element. So that what came through, and we did a proof of concept around a rules as code approach to resource consent applications and guiding people through that process. And then we did some testing of that with homeowners, planning consultants, and architects. And I think the homeowner who we spoke to just said it so well. And she did say the word, "That's my house." That's literally what she said. But I think I see that what she was intending was that, that's my home. And so it's, it's really important to understand the feelings that people have when they're interacting with a bureaucratic, what seems to be an overly bureaucratic process. So with a homeowner's perspective, the process means that they have to rely on a lot of professionals. So architects, builders, engineers, and planning consultants, and they're really expensive. And so the homeowner wanted to be on a much more equal footing and understanding what the process was and understanding where they were in their situation. But they felt like this system was really not designed for them at all. It really locked them out of it. And considering they were the one footing the bill, that didn't really seem fair in a lot of respects. So we understood the problem statement that we have here for resource consents. And so this was just sort of through our research discovery, but really understanding that we weren't delivering to the expectations internally and externally. So we've got problems with our processes, and it's just really opaque. The applications from customers weren't at the best quality for us to be able to deliver a good service. And there was inconsistent advice being given to our customers. So even within the resource consents team, we're giving inconsistent decisions. And then an underlying thing is poorly connected systems and processes and tools, and lots of manual. And this stuff will be all familiar to any of you who've done any research about how we're delivering our systems inside council. And then fundamentally a real difficulty in monitoring and understanding the impacts of our decision making. So an example of that was when one of the people in the district plan team was trying to understand a particular trend, and they wanted to know over time what had been the trend in the footprint size of apartments. So, what's the square footage of apartments in Wellington, and has that changed over time? Are we now getting smaller and smaller apartments? Now, he had to hire a student, I think, for about 4 months to trawl through teamwork and pull out PDF documents and use Adobe's measurement tool to try and measure the footprint size on the diagrams. Yeah, but I mean, that's a piece of data, right? And that's there. Being a data person, I just find this whole thing fascinating, because what we do is we lock up rich information into PDFs or documents that we cannot get to. And we really need that to be free for our own use and freely, openly accessible for our own use, but also for our customers' use. So this is a rather complicated diagram that I came up with, but it was trying to understand the value chain of resource consents. And so across the top, read for you guys, but across the top, it's really just saying what the expectations are of customers. They want that transparency of process. They want they want timeliness, they want efficiency, they want to at least feel that they've got some type of control. And then in this blue box over here, where it's like their responsibility, whether the applicant is a planning consultant, architect, a builder, or the homeowner, they have to provide a quality application, because that's going to give them the best chance of having getting the right decisions made by council. And then council's got an accountability to make robust, consistent and timely decisions. And then that feeds back into our accountability for considering and monitoring the impacts of our decisions, both at the property and neighbourhood level, but also at the citywide level. And so feeding into that is the really, really important aspect of having timely access to accurate, up-to-date, comprehensive information, which is the district plan, it is the Resource Management Act, and it's all the trends and insights that we can gain from all of our data. It's the decisions and the compliance requirements, and it's the property and customer information. So all of that stuff is absolutely critical, and it feeds both the process of and decision making of resource consents. And then out of that, there are a whole lot of other products and processes that rely on that information being really good quality. So, that's about planning for city resilience, but it's also a review of the RMA and other government policies, and even our requirement to provide access to this information for property valuations. So there's significant impacts on the way that we deliver this service. So looking at this from a point of view of where is the strategic place to start if you want to try and improve this as an entire value chain, I thought that the best place to start is actually right at the beginning, which is the application itself. Because if you can improve that process for the customer so that they can provide a quality application, then you can improve it internally as well. And that's where a lot of the initial information and data is generated at that point. So we did a prototype and we got and tested that with a few people, and we just spent 6 weeks doing that about a year ago, and got approval to go forward to produce something that's basically a minimum viable product that guides people through just answering the question of, do I need to apply for a resource consent? And this is just sort of the very first step in this, improving this entire value chain. So in a few weeks, towards the end of October, hopefully we are launching this thing, which the internal name for it is Rubric, which stands for Rules-Based Improved Consents or something, rules-based resulting in improved consents. But a rubric is actually an assessment criteria normally used in the education system. So it kind of worked-ish. I think I'm getting better at naming things slowly. Anyway, so this is kind of the steps that it will take you through. I can't demo the tool right now because there's a little bit of a rebuild happening at Tim's desk at the moment. But essentially, what's happening beneath it is taking very much a data and coded rules-based approach and reusable components-based approach and API approach. So we already have this geospatial data that's available from the wonderful GIS team, and what we've been doing is taking the document that is the district plan and turning that into reusable chunks of content, and including all the definitions. And we've been producing user-facing questions to help people, because the district plan itself is a massive rule set, and it's got difficult language because it's been developed and improved and changed over 20 years. It's also got a lot of language from 20 years ago. It's got things like almost thou shalt. It almost sort of talks like that. This shall be like this. So it's good fun. And because of the way the parts of it were written, it's been really hard and interesting experience to try and get a consistent agreement from the resource consents team as to what the interpretation is. So what we've been doing in some regards is cementing the council's interpretation of the district plan, its own rule set that it governs. So alongside turning the district plan into data, we have been coding the logic of the rules. of the district plan and making them available as API. So the idea here is that we can create a tool that helps guide people through the resource consent process. We can hopefully also use those coded rules to do modelling, put it into Sean's digital twin of the city, and but also if we want to, we can just produce out of that district plan as a document or a website or whatever we want. So there's a couple of underlying, I'm almost at the end, by the way. There's a couple of underlying tools that we're using to do this. One of them is this tool that's called Drills, which is where we're actually putting all the rules in that basically you create it in here and it can go to an execution engine and it can magically just be, these rules can be run programmatically. And this is using a standard called decision model and notation, which is a relatively new standard. And while this looks like a weird kind of diagram, it's each one of those boxes you can click into it, and essentially what you're doing is writing a logical statement, a logical expression, the type that you might use if you were writing a little bit of a formula in Excel. So I'm not a software developer, and I have written all of the residential standards from the district plan since lockdown. So it's my fault if it doesn't work, but it's also got a testing tool in there, and I've been working very closely with the planners themselves, and so we've done a lot of testing of each of the components of this, and right now we're doing the testing of bringing the whole thing together. I'm only highlighting this because essentially what it's doing is this is also an open source tool that we're using, so it's a first sort of step into a rules engine and doing something that's actually no code or low code, so it could be done by anybody who can think logically and logical expressions and doesn't have to be a programmer. And then the other thing that we're using for the content of the district plan is a headless content management system. So this is called Directus. When we're using, again, it's a open source tool, and it basically is an interface to build your own content API. And you can, I love playing around with spreadsheets. So this essentially is a giant relational database or a giant spreadsheet, and you can configure it how you want, and it outputs an API. And so you can, have all sorts of chunks of content and pull them together in any way you want to. And so I've built up lots of different collections, which are different aspects, and it includes all of our user-facing questions, all of our guidance, the diagrams that go with guidance, every single part of the MVP of the plan. So that's been quite fun, learning how to do that. And I promised Matt I'd show him through it, and anyone else who's interested as well. Now, my conclusions they kind of are overall for my whole presentation, and I don't think any of this really would be any surprise to any of you. But it's about, now I've sort of jumped straight from here is the technology, but again, we were driven by our understanding of what people need, not necessarily what they say they want, because there's still that adage of you ask people what they want and they'll ask for faster horses. So sometimes you have to say, what is the underlying need? And the underlying need from the customer's perspective is to have assurance that they are putting together, they are applying for resource consent when they need one. Another example is what's quite often happens is that people apply for a building consent not knowing that they should have applied for a resource consent beforehand. So this tool will help them to work that out beforehand, hopefully. But anyway, it's about that customer delivery, but at the same time, this tool is going to help the resource consents team. It's also going to hopefully help shape the conversations they have with their clients, and make it a lot easier for everybody to be on the same page. So while there's a lot of technology and exciting stuff in there, it is still trying to make sure that we are solving the right problem in the right way. So we did a lot of that upfront work, and so we did the upfront work to understand that problem, the different perspectives, identify the right problem. We did an experiment, which was a 6-week proof of concept of an approach to solving that, to checked with people that we were going to solve that in the right way. I like number 3, devolve influence to those closest to the problem. And I think that so far from my experiences of Smart Council, that is definitely an approach that's used here, which is really refreshing. But essentially it's saying that you guys know your area, you're subject matter experts, you know what the pain points really are, so you guys are the ones that are best placed to solve that problem. That's not been my experience in the in the public service. There's a lot of senior leaders who think that they know the answer and won't listen to anything else, so that can be problematic. So I really like the way that it's approached here. And then number 4, and I think you guys are all aware of that, sustainable change is slow, but it needs to be deliberate, and it has to involve the right people from the outset, those people affected. And also, while I get excited about the technology, it's not the driver, it only enables us to make changes. So that's the end of the presentation. Does anybody have any questions?
Hey Nadia, this is Matt. Can you run us?
Sorry, you're quite quiet, and I'm just going to do one thing. I'm just going to disconnect my HDMI because I've only got one person in the room now.
Oh, James ran away, did he?
You're still quiet. I'm not sure why.
Sorry. I'll check my settings as well. 1 second.
Maybe check the settings inside Teams.
Yeah. Yeah. Not sure why, but it might be.
Settings.
I'm just testing my settings as well.
Oh, here we go. No, it's me, I think. Is that better?
Testing.
Yeah, good. Cool. Sorry, that was mine. Don't know why it changed, but yeah. All good.
Hey, this is a weird question, Nadia. Can you walk us through how you, just a hypothetical of how you think rubric and the consequences of it, how it unfolds over the next 3 years? Like best case scenario, I guess worst case scenario, it just evaporates, I guess. But best case scenario, how does it go from strength to strength over the next 3 years?
Okay, so what we've done so far is an MVP, and we've only taken part of the district plan, and we have, so we want to see, but it is the part which is residential rules that is probably about 60% of the resource consents that come through. So it'll be a good test to see if this approach is valuable. How I see it is that you're generating data about the application. To begin with our MVP, we're not saving that. We don't have a database that's holding on to that. People come back and get it later. Because normally what happens is people need to know if they need to apply for resource consent. There's quite a lot of work that's involved in developing an application itself. So that's a delay in that process. It could be months or years. I see that we would need to in the future be able to store that information and people can come back and change it. Ideally, that data comes into the organisation as part of the application, and then that is data that we hold about that resource consent, because at the moment it is going to be quite detailed information. But a longer term view is there is a change happening in the building space, and that's using, so people are aware of like CAD drawings and things of buildings. So there is a change that's happening, and it's using building information models, or called BIMs. And some people in the building industry are using these. It's growing internationally. So we want to be in a space that we're ready for BIMs to be coming in. So that's a much more detailed version of or a 3D model of a building. That tied with the geospatial element, even at a blockwork kind of point of view, could be part of a resource consent application. The rules then could be passed over the digital version of the application and doesn't necessarily then require people to be inputting each piece of the data. So that's a longer term view. To achieve that, we need to have BIM standards. So there needs to be, probably across either central and or local government, an expected level of data standards that we have for BIMs. Luckily, I think LINZ is working at least with the Victorian government around this. So there are people who are starting to work in that space, so that's something I'm keeping an eye on. But longer term, what I'm trying to achieve here is that both you've achieved the need for people to be able to understand what's required of them, how they might, when they're saying, could I subdivide my land? What kind of house could I put in? What could I do, or what might I do? We need to develop a slightly different interface so that people could answer those questions. So that's something we can do from the rule set that we've coded. Then we are trying to capture that data and bring that through our entire process. So that's kind of how I see it just within the resource consent space. Broader than that, we've got all sorts of consenting processes and all sorts of processes across government, across council, where we have rule sets that people need to comply with, and they need to be able to navigate in a much simpler way. So we could expand it to other things like potentially applying for a liquor license, or all sorts of different things. The idea here is they're all components. So the rule set's a separate component from the interface, and you can build whatever interfaces you want. So that's kind of, I hope that answers your question. Probably a bit long-winded, but
Transformational. That's what it sounds like, because I guess as your MVP becomes not MVP, but like an actual product, then the organization, like your entire consenting departments, all of those people kind of need to change to support it, like as BAU, which, I have no idea what that looks like. Right. As a change process.
Yeah. So that's why it's been integral since the very beginning that the resource consent planners have been involved in this. So from the proof of concept, we had a planner involved, and we've had endorsement from the management there. And through the build of the MVP, we've had the planners involved. It will impact people's jobs. There are currently planning technicians who work in the resource consents team, and their job is to sit on the phone and answer the very questions that our tool is going to answer. So they're always answering the same questions over and over again about interpretations of the district plan. So we recognise, and we did when we started, this is going to impact those people's jobs. But those jobs are transitional. They're sort of like how you grow a planner into becoming a fully fledged planner. So they're supposed to be grown into doing the more complicated things, because our tool isn't going to work for the complicated things. At the stage, it's only going to work for residential, and it doesn't include subdivision right now. So it's just there as a tool to enhance what we have, and also take some of the administrative, and that's where we want to get to, is reduce the administrative burden on people, internal and external, and free people up to be concentrating on those really complicated and the decision making that has to happen through this process. We're not making any decisions on behalf, this tool isn't making any decisions, because that, and in the way that the rules are structured and the way the RMA is that there is a lot of openness for creativity, for solutions, and that's a very human thing. So that's not something we're trying to automate, for example.
And there would, I guess, be new jobs to maintain those rules, to continue to evolve that product over time.
Yep, exactly.
Hey, Nadia. Whoa. What do you think the percentage chance is that central government will standardise, provide a data standard for BIMs in the next 3 years?
I don't know. Between you, me, and the fence post, I wouldn't put much faith in MB doing much. They did support a BIM community that was in the industry. That was started a few years ago, but I think that's possibly fizzled. I think that jumping in with other local government bodies, so for example, or other government bodies, so I've already made connection with the state of Victoria and their planning department, so they want to do it, and they want to work with people, like they're working already with LINs. So yeah, there are other people, and I don't think it's something that Wellington City Council does on its own. We can't go and create our own standard.
Guess I'm just trying to, like, there's two hypothetical futures. One where someone, thank goodness, provides a standard, and also it's a good standard, and also people use the good standard, right? But then there's another path where either no one provides a standard, or some other place creates a standard, and it's either not a good standard or it's a great standard, but no one adopts the standard. And it's like, those are two quite different worlds to design for.
Yeah, I mean, at this stage, we don't really have to worry too much about it, I think, because it's not just about the standard, it's about the industry itself picking up using BIMs. And still, that's rather small percentage of the industry. Another aspect to it is the software that's needed to be able to consume them. So our building consents team here in Wellington City Council has access to software, but they have limited licenses. There are also pragmatic aspects to this, and that is that every person, every engineer, builder, surveyor, none of them want to be handling a tablet on site and trying to look at a building plan. What we need to be doing is leaping from where we are now, which is a paper one, not going to a tablet-based version of the building plan, and leaping straight to an augmented reality one. Right, so that's where you put on some glasses or whatever, and now you can see the building plan in overlaid, or other technologies. But we shouldn't be jumping from where we are now to now you have to zoom in and out on a tablet. It's just not going to work, and it won't get picked up. So there has to be a whole lot of value seen in the physical space as well as in the digital space, and how this is going to work. So that's still a whole journey, and I don't think we necessarily have to be the ones to drive that, but we can help champion it and say this is the direction we want to go in. But the BIMs themselves, I mean, we can still continue down this path if the MVP that we've produced is proved valuable. I think there'd still be huge amounts of improvements that we can make to the MVP and the way that we're presenting questions and all sorts of things. So I always say you don't know the value of something until it's really in the hands of users. So we've still got that to happen yet.
I'm conscious that it just hit 4 o'clock. So thank you so much, Nadia. This will get shared in the Teams channel, and so a whole bunch of other people will get to have a look at it later on. But thank you so much for the hour and the presentation. It was really interesting, and I think that we are very lucky to have you inside the building helping us on this stuff.
Thank you. Okay, bye.
See you later.